Hi, my name is Dave Broussard. I'm president and founder of Impact France, and today I want to talk to you more about the Separatist law and its implications for the church in France. As you may have heard, on August 25th, the Separatist law in France took full effect. So what does that mean for the French churches that are trying to share the gospel in France today? Well, I wanted to go through several of the implications and the pieces of the law to just get us in tune and praying for the French church. They need our prayers because this has been the largest modification of a law governing the separation of church and state that has happened in over 100 years. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that later, but right now we really need to pray for our brothers and sisters in France, the pastors of the French churches, because they are the ones that are going to be directly impacted by this law. So there are a couple different aspects of this law that are going to directly impact the French church today. There's kind of the registration piece of the church. There is the financial accountability and transparency of the church. And then there's the actual how do pastors do church, what are they preaching and how are they preaching it, that is also going to be a part of this law. So the first part of this law has to do with registration of churches. So churches in the 1905 law, so churches have to register with the prefecture basically all right now, starting now until 2022. How that's going to happen is still to be determined, but during 2022, this next year, they're going to have to go to their prefecture and they're going to have to register. And they're going to have to register every 5 years after that. Once they register, they may or may not be approved as a church. That's going to be in the hands of the local prefecture to approve or deny the registration of this church, and they have 2 months to do it. For 60 days, the pastor is going to be wondering, am I going to have a church to go to, or are they going to deny me for some reason, and I'm going to have to go through all these appeal process. So already just having a church on a list needing to be approved by the French government to worship is the number one thing that's going to happen, the very first thing that's going to happen. The second piece to that and the financial side is a lot more financial transparency and sharing information with the government. Just for an example, at the end of each year, churches are going to have to give a list of all the tax receipts that they provided along with the total amount. So how much did you receive and how many tax receipts did you give out? Where are your books? Do you have certified accounts? Have you received funding over 10,000 euros from any foreign entities or a combination of foreign entities? And you need to share that with us and tell us who gave you which money and why. And if we say, as the prefecture, that you shouldn't have had that money, you're going to have to give it back. So obviously in the financial piece of things, there are a lot of different implications for churches that are just going to add a lot of administrative burden, a lot of accounting burden, and frankly, a lot of transparency that why are you wanting this information? What are you going to do with that information? What if you see something in that information that you don't like? Are you going to come and shut us down? The state right now in all of these laws have a lot more power to shut down churches, temporarily close places of worship for any one of these infractions. Just the other day, in fact, we had a gift of $50, so about 40 euros, that we wanted to send to a church. And the pastor wrote me and said, hey, thank you so much for this gift. We are not going to be able to receive it. The new law that's been passed in France is something that we don't want to have to deal with. So we are actually categorically refusing all foreign funding because they don't want to deal with the French law. And the French law, this law, which is supposed to be fighting terrorism, is actually targeting evangelical churches. For people who say that this law is not going to be applied to evangelical churches and it's only going to be applied to Muslims because that was the point, the intent was to stop radical Islam, I would just say that that was an accusation that was being thrown around at the government during the time of the debates. The very first reaction of Gérald Darmanin when he was accused of only targeting Muslims said, hey, the evangelicals are a significant problem too. Well, so those of us who think that we are not going to be at some point as evangelicals looked at as religious fanatics that need to be reined in, I'm afraid that's not the case. the French government already has the evangelicals in mind when they're thinking about this law. The other part of this is that this law targets associations that are in a 1905 law. So the 1905 law, you may have heard of that if you've looked at this law, the Separatist law. This is the law that was started in 1905 that basically guaranteed separation of church and state primarily for evangelicals, because the Catholics were a recognized religion, the Reformed Church was a recognized religion, the evangelicals, which only numbered about 30,000 at that time, were not. They were non reconnus, which means they were not recognized as a legitimate religion in France, which caused a lot of stigmatism. And so when the 1905 law came about, and the government started to debate, well, hey, should we open this up to everybody, and particularly these evangelicals, it was heralded as a gift from God. Providential was some of the words that were used. In fact, two evangelical free pastors helped to draft portions of the law. Rubens Sayence, who is the founder of the Bible Institute in Nogent, heralded the day as the most beautiful day in the history of France when this 1905 law was passed. So the 1905 law was heralded as a wonderful thing for the separation of church and state. And we are really moving into the surveillance of church by the state. One of the provisions in the law is that the prefecture can temporarily close churches if they are found to have ideas, theories, proposals, or activities that promote, justify, or encourage hate or violence against a person or a group of people. You can spend 6 months in prison and have €75,000 fine for the pastor. Now you say, well, churches, they're not promoting hate and violence. I mean, clearly not. Yet the interpretation of what is hate in our society that continues to shift is actually very concerning. Just this summer, even before the law was passed, there was a situation where a religious individual, a leader of a religious group, read from their sacred text, read from their text, and it was interpreted to be misogynistic. And this individual was in France on a visa since 2013, so 7-8 years had been on a visa. And the state, at the federal level, right, the Ministry of the Interior, they saw this reading of their scripture, and they contacted the religious institution, and they contacted this individual and said, thank you, your visa is not renewed. You are now expelled from the country. So we can think about missionaries. If you've gotten a letter from a missionary that talked about a visa or renewing a carte de séjour, this is the same situation. The state is going to be monitoring preaching on all different forms of social media. If you've done a YouTube video, if one of the services has been recorded, they're going to be looking at religious texts, they're going to be looking at preaching, and they're going to be making decisions about the closing of churches and the expelling of missionaries from here on out. This has already been happening. In fact, the Pew Center for Research on Religious Persecution and Restrictions has France listed as, before the law, as the most restrictive country in Europe, behind only Russia, Belarus, and Bulgaria. So what can we do practically to help our brothers and sisters in France, to help the pastors of France, of local French churches, to be unfettered in their announcing the gospel to this nation? What can we do? The first thing is pray. We should pray for wisdom. We should be praying for strength, for encouragement. This could be very discouraging to see all this list of things and have the pastors feel the weight of the French government on their shoulders. So pray for a light load, that they come to Jesus and the Lord would just make a way for them to have peace in their hearts. So prayer, and any way, of course, the Lord leads you to pray, just pray for the French church, pray for the pastors that are going to be working in this environment now. And the second thing you can do is work with us at Impact France. We have started a Separatist Law Fund that is going to support the efforts of the National Council of French Evangelicals, the CNEF. So the CNEF has been the lead agency from the get-go on this law to really track it, understand what it means for French churches, and then to offer support for pastors and other ministry leaders as they try to navigate the complexities of this legal situation. So they already have legal counsel. They want to bring on another part-time legal counsel. They want to create a website. They want to do regional trainings for the pastors and the ministry leaders. They want to offer one-on-one support throughout the year 2022. 2022 is the key year for this law to be implemented. This is when all of the details are going to be finalized in the statutes and the decrees. This is really when they're going to get specific dates and timelines and when they need to comply with which pieces. And a lot of moving parts. It can be very complex. So this is the year that we want to raise funds for the National Council of French Evangelicals with the Separatist Law Fund to get the French churches in a place where they can be as free and unfettered as possible within this law, complying with all the statutes that are going to come out. So we have already, it's going to cost about $100,000. So a little about 90,000, 83,000 euros. So about $100,000. The CNAF has already raised some money. We have a matching grant that's already in place, and we're looking to raise another about $45,000, $50,000 by the end of the year to help launch the French church into this new season that has unfortunately, the French government and all the separatist law restrictions in place. But we want to launch them as best we can into this new season to be, again, free, unfettered, announcing the gospel of Jesus Christ, freedom in Christ to the French people. This is our goal. This is what the separatist law helps us to ensure, and we would love to have your support. Thank you so much for your prayers. Thank you so much for your support. God bless you, and thank you for your work.